I recall, almost word for word, the telephone call which had informed me that Lainey had disappeared. Her teacher, calm, unbearable, all saccharine platitudes and reassurance. My own voice fraught and strangled with an instant and instinctual panic. At that time I had only just emerged, inwardly bruised and outwardly haggard, from a 2-year custody battle with my ex-husband, who had dogged me through the courts, not out of any particular interest in Lainey, whom he had always handled with a stranger's cold unfeeling, but to harangue me to the point I felt half mad, my penance for refusing to yield to the man's more violent torments. Our daughter was the only beautiful thing that I had gleaned from our decade together, and I cleaved to her, my prize, my love, with such ferocity that each time I dropped her off at school in the morning, I would sit in the parking lot and shake with a passionate dread of anything happening to her in the hours she was not in my care. All parents know the power of imagined horrors, the kidnapper idling on every corner in the sinister white shell of a van, the teacher alone in a vacant classroom, the husband with quick and vicious fists loitering at the school gates to whisk the unwitting child away. All these things and more cavorted in my mind in a grim and raucous glee, as I answered the call from Lainey's teacher, knowing with the psychic sureness of any mother that something was wrong. "It's all right, Miss Cameron," said Miss Paxton, whom I had always found to be an insipid and distinctly useless character. "I'm sure Lainey just wandered off and got a little confused trying to find her way back to the group. The park rangers are all out looking for her. I'm sure she'll be found in no time at all." It was all I could do not to scream a dozen accusatory questions down the line. "How could you lose her? Isn't it your job to take care of the class? Don't you know that there are savage animals and deep water and steep drops out there in the wilderness? Haven't you thought about that the way I have? Agonized like I have, suffered and yearned to save the innocent from all the colors of horror in the world." "She's only 10 years old, for God's sake," I snapped through gritted teeth. "She must be terrified." Yet even as I said it, I knew the most dangerous thing was that Lainey wouldn't be frightened at all. She had always been a placid, adventurous child, undeterred from her exploratory whims by scratches and bruises, nor by being separated from me or any other guardian. I recall losing her in a shopping mall at the heights of the festive season, finding her, after 3 hours of tearful searching, by a water fountain, tossing nickels she'd found in one lint-filled pocket down into the verdigris depths. "Hi, Mum," Lainey had said, her blonde eyebrows raised with a cool adult surprise at my distress. "I'm making a wish. Think it'll come true. Through luck and my meticulous care, nothing truly terrible had ever happened to my daughter." No wonder, then, that she could not conceive of herself at the center of such an event. Disaster was, to Lainey, a distant fairy tale, the Rumpelstiltskin that only came for other children of another time. Yet these ills had indeed now taken her, and as I languished by the phone awaiting another call, I pictured 1,000 scenarios, each more sickening than the last. It didn't help matters that the national park in which Lainey had disappeared was notorious for missing persons reports and other unsavory incidents, many of which were quietly suppressed from local news. I had, of course, vehemently opposed the school's decision to include a visit to the area as part of the new curriculum, appalled to find myself bullied into acquiescence by the principal and board alike. Thus, upon finding my neurosis vindicated, I could only logically assume that my grislier fantasies would be confirmed in a like fashion. I was no retentive paranoiac, the hysteric archetype of the crumbling woman. Looking back, I might argue my suspicions were but pangs of psionic foresight, a sense that would step forth from shadowed peripheries in the following days and make itself their heart. Smoking cigarette after cigarette in fractious helplessness, I envisioned, darkly, the face of Lainey's father upon receiving the news of her death. Like the mask of some malevolent pagan god, he'd sup greedily from the liquor of my grief. The denouement of his daughter's existence, nothing to him but a tool to eviscerate a reaction from me. Then, suddenly, the phone rang again, causing me to jump so violently that I spilled ash down the front of my dress. "Good news, Ms. Cameron. Lainey turned up, and she's just fine." I pressed a hand to my mouth, unsure whether I was going to vomit or burst into tears. "What happened?" I asked. "Where did you find her?" There was an odd little laugh on the other end of the line. "Well, it's sort of strange," said Miss Paxton. "One of the rangers found her at the bottom of a 7-foot hole in a meadow. It looked to be a burrow of some kind. Lord knows what made it. Lainey must have just fallen in by accident. We've looked her over, and luckily she doesn't have even a scratch on her. If you'd like to pick her up, she's fine to go home. As I said, she's not injured. Just a little shaken up, is all." I got into my car and drove the hour-long journey to the park, so soaked in the adrenaline of relief that I was like a dreamer, watching my white hands curl in spidering husks upon the wheel. When I pulled up to the park ranger's station, an officer was loitering out front beside Miss Paxton, who was holding the hand of a small blonde child with a firmness that suggested it might run away from her the moment she let go. The little figure stood with its back to me, short-haired and androgynous as an elf, staring off into the forest, as though watching something move in the trees. The other kids milled about nearby, their eyes flat and aloof. I noticed they gave the light-haired child a wide berth, which, had it been Lainey, would have been strikingly unusual, being that she made friends easily and was close to a group of 5 other girls in her class. Not one of them looked at or spoke to her, loitering at the vertices of the clearing, whispering amongst themselves. As I got out of the car, I saw the blonde child twist at Miss Paxton's arm, attempting to dislodge itself and wander off into the woods. Although the hair was right, and it was wearing a similar outfit to that which I had set out for Lainey that morning, nothing in its body language was reminiscent of my daughter, whose loose-shouldered, tomboyish posture I would have recognized at once. Was there some mistake? Had this idiot of a teacher somehow confused Lainey with some other unknown child? Miss Paxton turned towards me with a welcoming smile, which wavered as she caught my expression. The thin little child stranger swiveled awkwardly on her arm, still wanting to go in the other direction. "Lainey," said the teacher brightly. "Look, your mum's here." She spoke as she might to an infant, and from this I gleaned there was something amiss she hadn't deigned to tell me over the phone. Pressing a hand to the small of the child's back, she ushered it forwards, and at last its face turned towards me, no more familiar than its posture had been. I suppose the girl looked enough like Lainey that anyone might mistake them at a passing glance, but that was all. This child's eyes were spaced further apart, the mouth small and cruel, the nose thinner, and missing the aquiline shape she inherited from me. It was as though Lainey's own face had been drawn from memory, and a poor one at that. Cousins they could easily be, but the same child they were not, and I was amazed that the teacher that saw her 5 days a week could possibly think them identical. It was as I glanced up into the young woman's shifting eyes behind her glasses that I realized she didn't believe it. Not really. Now it seems to me that what she perceived was so beyond her understanding that she had simply elected to place her trust in the most logical explanation, yet not the correct one. Then, however, I merely assumed that she was lying to me for some nefarious purpose, and found myself coolly unsurprised. The world had always seemed set against me and my daughter, Why then would the person entrusted to care for my only child be any different? "What is this?" I asked, harshly. "Where's Lainey?" Miss Paxton's face drained of colour, and she stammered through a few brittle sentence starters, unable to finish even one. The girl that wasn't my daughter twitched and fussed in her grip, her pale eyes as indifferent to my presence as the sea to the swimmer it drowns. "I would like to have a word with you, Miss Cameron," said the ranger. "Talk with me in the station a second." She was a thin, short-haired woman, hard with corded muscle, and speaking in the sharp, almost Germanic accent that was common to some of the nearby towns. I wanted to refuse the ranger's offer, rally angrily against her with all the obstinance my fear and anguish could lend me. But in the end, I went after her, looking back over my shoulder at the unfamiliar child, who flinched and jolted at the end of the schoolteacher's arm, like a condemned man in a rain of artillery fire. The ranger, whose name was Diane Becker, sat me down in a rickety chair and brewed me a cup of coffee so black that I almost retched at the first swig. "Who is that kid out there?" I asked. "She isn't my daughter. Was it you that found her?" "My colleague," said Becker flatly. "She's off shift. I'll get you her number if you want to talk to her. But anyway, I was there when Mel brought the kid back to the station. Had this with her. The teacher recognized it." The ranger picked up a purple rainbow-printed backpack from a nearby desk and pushed it towards me, watching blandly as I touched the name tag and ferreted through the contents. The workbooks with their untidy handwriting, the uneaten packed lunch, the pencil case, whose utensils were all nibbled surreptitiously at their ends. "It's your daughter's?" asked Becker with the intonation of a statement. "Yes," I said reluctantly. "But it doesn't matter. That girl out there? I've never seen her before in my life. Lainey is still missing." Becker regarded me without expression. "So you're saying a kid turned up with your daughter's description, wearing her clothes, carrying her stuff, but it ain't your daughter?" I knew how it sounded, but hearing it echoed back in that detached monotone made me want to scream out in frustration. Instead, I pulled my cellular phone from my pocket and shoved it at Becker, stabbing my finger at photographs and video clips of Lainey as the ranger looked on with cool, dispassionate eyes. "Look," I said, "that's my baby. That's what she looks like. That's her face. That girl your colleague picked up, they're not the same. Can't you see that? And the kids in Lainey's class, none of them know who she is either. Why are you lying to me? What's going on?" But Becker only shrugged, her weathered face an impenetrable slab. "I don't know what to tell you, Ma'am," she said. "I'm not seeing the difference." I pinched the bridge of my nose, holding back the threatened tears. "I'm not crazy, okay? There's been some kind of mix-up. That girl's parents are probably frantic, looking for her." Becker shrugged. "Haven't heard anything about that. Only missing kid this week is yours." The helplessness I felt as I stared at the ranger was of such intensity that my vision swam like a desert heat at the edges, a white and crystalline blindness. Becker clearly noticed something amiss in my face, for she shoved the cooling coffee cup towards me and placed a coarse palm on my shoulder. "If you think something's wrong, maybe you ought to take the kid to a doctor," she said gently. "Get her looked over, you know." Likely Becker thought me unstable, in shock, caught up in the sort of excitement that would die down in a day or two. There was nothing I could say to prove or defend myself. I saw that clearly. I stood up from the table, seizing Lainey's backpack in a wretched burst of anger. "She is not my daughter," I said, again. "When I get to the bottom of this, you'll hear about it, make no mistake." For all my bluster, I was hyperventilating as I shoved my way back out into the clearing again, every breath soaring up through my side like an animal bite. I don't remember how I went from this pitiful state to sitting with the strange child in the back of the car, driving mechanically along the road. I only recall staring at the little creature in the rear-view mirror, looking desperately for something of Lainey in its pale, furtive eyes, its twitching person, finding nothing. There was no recognition in the sharp little features, no understanding of where it was or what it was doing. I saw it wrestle with the seatbelt like a dog against its collar, put one grubby hand against the passenger window as though expecting it to slip right through into the air beyond. See, I couldn't fathom where so wild and capricious and unthinking a child might have sprung from, and despaired that through the stupidity of others it had been thrust upon me. Through a great amount of wheedling and pressure, I was able to wrangle an emergency checkup appointment with Lainey's pediatrician, a weary, middle-aged woman who'd handled my daughter's case so many times over the past 5 years. I had no doubt that she, at least, would recognize the grave mistake that had been made when I presented her with the little stranger. It was a trial cajoling the child out of the car into the doctor's office. It only glared with a beady, crow-like malice, and attempted to dart past me, prevented only by my hand at its elbow. The arm was all sinew and bone beneath its jacket, soft as twigs under wet leaves. I gave a short cry of disgust and forced myself to cling on, lest the child flee across the parking lot and into the busy road. While not Lainey, it was a little girl, and my maternal instinct to protect life still remained. I kept the stranger close to my side as I pushed it through the office door, wrinkling my nose at the scent of dirt and wet grass that lingered on the child's hair and clothes. I'm not sure what I anticipated upon presenting it to Dr. Maddox. Arched eyebrows, perhaps, asking where Lainey was, if I was caring for a young relative for the day. Yet there was no such surprise, only the usual greeting and tepid professionalism with which she carried out every appointment. As per my request, she enacted a full body examination, including of the teeth. I had some notion, from true crime media, that the identity of the stranger might be unearthed that way. The child was obstinate throughout, not with aggression so much as an aversion to touch, writhing about with a lithe, ferrety determination. I dithered, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or disconcerted. The doctor seemed unsurprised by the display, however, going about her work with prosaic method. Only when the child was allowed to slip from the examination table and hunch, all elbows and knees in one corner, did Dr. Maddox take me aside for a hushed conversation. "Ms. Cameron, why did you bring Lainey in to see me today?" she asked in tones of brittle neutrality. The truth would sound akin to madness. Aware of this, I only said, "I was wondering if you'd noticed a physical difference in Lainey since you last saw her." Dr. Maddox glanced at the child, who stared out of a nearby window, observing a small bird cleaning its wings in a tree. "It's not her physical health that worries me," she said. "The behavioral changes, however, the mutism, the restlessness. I have to ask, has anything new happened at home?" This being a delicate, euphemistic reference to the divorce, to Lainey's father. "Not at home, no," I said carefully. "Earlier today there was an incident on a school trip. Lainey wandered off, had some kind of accident. She's been like this since then. Not talking, doesn't respond to anything I or anyone else says. She's totally changed. It doesn't make sense." Dr. Maddox made a sound of gentle understanding, and in it I lost all hope of support, of being heard. "Sometimes it's the little things that trigger a reaction that's built up from earlier incidents," she said. "A delayed reaction. It may seem sudden, but all things considered, it makes sense. I can recommend a psychologist to look into this better than I can. I imagined the child crouching, silent and unpleasant as a hobgoblin, while I was pressured into lying to another clueless professional. "No," I said. "No, thank you. Not today." Ignoring the concern in Dr. Maddox's eyes, I turned to the stranger we were pretending was Lainey. Inexplicably, it struck me that perhaps it was not even a child at all, an unsettling thought, bidden from the oddness and mystery of the circumstances, yet one that lingered all the same. "Come on," I said to it in a hoarse voice. The child's head twitched, but it only continued its watch of the window, its thin mouth slightly ajar. Then, as I reached towards it, the head turned, and I thought for one hideous moment that it was going to bite my arm with its perfect little teeth. I froze, not knowing what to do, too frightened and too appalled by the thought to strike it, too stunned to move away. At last, the child stood, and when I stepped towards the door, it followed, allowing me, with a short twitch, to take its clammy hand, little though I wanted to. It was in the parking lot that I had my first truly unkind thought towards the stranger. Not of harming it, merely of leaving the child there where it would be found and driving away. But I knew it was impossible. I would be arrested for child abandonment and endangerment, institutionalized perhaps. There would be no end to my accountability, for I could not defend myself when the only other being that might have spoken in my favor had uttered not one word, nor seemed remotely capable of doing so. So it was that I took the little stranger home, feeling more resentful of her presence, of her replacing Lainey, with every passing minute. I ended up cooking something for dinner with the stiff, mindless process of an automaton, caring little whether or not the child would like what I set on its plate. It would neither sit at the table nor consider the cutlery, squatting behind one of the chairs to look at me through the slats, its face spliced into irregular oblongs by each wooden spoke. The effect of this was that I could imagine even less how the individual pieces could ever come together to resemble Lainey's features, each of an unnatural difference from hers. "Who are you?" I hissed across the now gelid dinner. "Where is my daughter? Why are you here, and not her?" The child slid away from the chair and against the back door, scuffling like a hound plagued by worms. "All right," I said, sharply, standing up from my place with a screech of chair legs upon tiles. "Go outside. Play. Something." I unlocked the door and ushered the stranger out across the backyard, relieved that it went out without event, allowing me my first moment alone. The inescapable bind of my situation overwhelmed me, and again I collapsed into my chair, leaden as a coin dropped into some fathomless well. I missed Lainey terribly, thinking forlornly what a beautiful, simple afternoon it would be if she were still here, kicking her dirty sneakers off under the table with a sighing affectation of grown-up tiredness. She would have shown me a rock or flower she'd found on her trip, which I would pretend a dutiful fascination in, and cleared her plate of food in 15 minutes before managing to thieve a double helping from my own, her boyish, playful irreverence overshadowing the very light in the room. Remembering her hammered home ever plainly that the creature I'd brought back from the park was not Lainey, and as I stood up to look at the girl from the kitchen window, I wondered, with a twisting repulsion, what sort of parents had managed to raise such offspring. A light rain had fallen. Unperturbed, the child knelt at the edge of a flower bed, digging with both hands in the wet soil. "Hey," I said, sharply, "what are you doing?" As I stepped outside, one arm raised to shield my hair from the rain, I saw that a number of worms and other insects were churning about in the dirt, as though the child's very digging had drawn them up, like a seagull's dance. Disconcerted, I leaned down to pull the girl away, then stopped, a guttural cry jarring my chest. The child was shoveling handfuls of the infested soil into its mouth, stones, weeds, and clods of earth alike vanishing into the greedy pit of its throat. Brown and bloody spittle hung from the thin lips in swinging strands, and I was horribly amazed that the little white teeth did not break as they ground down on grit and decorative pebbles. "No," I snarled, and with a feat of strength I didn't know I possessed, I hoisted the squirming beast under one armpit and carried it back into the house, up to the bathroom. The chaos of undressing the stranger and thrusting its pale body under the showerhead was like a scene from some Victorian asylum, although conducted in an uncanny, scuffling silence that perturbed me more than if the child had screamed. I let go of it and leaned, panting with exertion, against the bathroom wall, wondering grimly why I had bothered, why I was still engaging with any of this. The child looked balefully at me from under a sodden cap of yellow hair, its cut mouth still. My eyes rooted to its pale ears, nudging from behind dripping fronds. Their tips were sharp, like white flint, unfamiliar. Another wrongness. Another indicator that the girl wasn't mine. Still, I deposited it in Lainey's bedroom for the night, there being no other space in the small house in which to have it sleep. It turned my stomach to think of the feral, silent child touching my daughter's things, leaving its damp scent on her stuffed animals, her pillows, the sheets. Twitching and unsettled by every perceived sound from Lainey's room, I imagined the child gnawing at the walls and crawling through them like a rat, or sickness in a dying tree. I tossed and turned until my pillow was flat and my hair tousled upright. In the end, I withdrew the cigarette carton I kept hidden at the back of my sock drawer and smoked to the end of the pack. When morning came, white and sore as a scar, I went to Lainey's room and opened the door slowly, poised to dart back should the child leap at me. Although it hadn't yet expressed any particular violence, outside its outbursts on contact, I well suspected an unprovoked attack would soon come. As daylight scythed through the doorway, I saw that, while the bed was empty, Lainey's quilts had been pulled down between the headboard and the wall into a sort of nest. The blankets stirred, and a tiny, spindle-fingered hand emerged, parting the blankets to reveal a pale eye, squinting at the light. There was only the barest recognition there, as of the pet of an acquaintance that has encountered you once or twice, and briefly at that. I felt suddenly a foreigner in my own home, alienated by the invader. I got the child dressed in Lainey's clothes as quickly as I was able, and dropped it at the school gates, half hoping that it would take off into the street and become lost indefinitely, unshackling me from its burden. Clinging to that dream, I drove off, glancing back over my shoulder to see the ugly little stick figure with its naked eyes, standing apart from the other students, insidious and strange. For the first time, I was glad of my doldrums office job, numbing my sadness and the lingering dread of the cuckoo child I'd been saddled with through work. I would gladly have chained myself to my laptop for reprieve, so rapidly had all sense and perspective left me in my turmoil. How comforting the beetle drone of the machine was to me. Then, the aseptic screen, and its endless figures, and their utter absence of meaning. A telephone call came, striking me from this drab comfort, like a sudden fall in a dream. Who was it to be? Miss Paxton? My ex-husband poised to gloat? "Mrs. Cameron?" a voice asked, youthful, wavering, as I hesitantly picked up the receiver. "It's Ms.," I said blandly. "Who is this?" "Excuse me, my name is Melanie Hale. I'm a volunteer at the National Park. Diane passed on your contact details. I was the one that brought your daughter in yesterday. Are you free to talk? Diane thought you might want to clear up some details with me." "Diane," I repeated, suddenly alert. "Becca? Yes, I remember her. She was pretty dismissive of my concerns, to be honest." I heard the younger woman swallow uncomfortably. "I'm sorry about that. She just has a different way of dealing with the public. I think she appreciated your situation, but, well, it's tricky." Unimpressed by her rambling, I said, "In what way? Miss Hale? Melanie? I'm certain you've given me the wrong child, and I don't have a scrap of proof. If there's anything you can tell me that would help me, I'd be grateful." There was another awkward pause before the volunteer answered. "It's difficult to explain without an intimate knowledge of the park. I've been here 3 years, and still it surprises me. I found your daughter in a meadow by our biggest lake. You probably heard she'd fallen down an animal burrow of some kind." How tired I was of the same story, which I little believed. "Well," said Melanie, "the thing is, we don't have any animals in the park capable of digging a burrow that large, and it certainly wasn't man-made. That rang some alarm bells with me, and probably with Diane too. But she would never bring this up with an outsider, unfortunately." A coldness ran across my shoulder blades like a shadow. I didn't like the halting nervousness in Melanie's voice, the sense that what I'd so long feared, without words, was forming before me. "Is this about the disappearances in the park?" I asked. "That's the theory the police have been coming to us with," said Melanie frankly. "And trust me, there's zero evidence of that. But I and plenty of other people have seen things here that might be explained in less straightforward ways." I glanced around the office, relieved that none of the other workers were paying attention. "Such as?" I prompted. Melanie cleared her throat, a smoker's cough. "This is going to sound really strange, but here it is. There are supernatural happenings here, is the only way I can put it. Everyone has their own idea of what's going on. Out in Walpurgis town, the residents are mostly old European settler families, and they brought a lot of their old myths over with them. Or contextualized what they saw with those stories, I guess. My nana used to tell me about fae folk that lived in caves and burrows, how they were just straight up mean and hateful to people that came across them. Sometimes they'd steal their possessions, other times the people themselves, and they'd leave their own behind in their places. Changelings, I think they're called. They're usually sick in all the stories. Obviously, I used to think it was all horse shit, but working here, seeing the missing folk that turn up, strange? I don't know. There's something here, but I wouldn't call them fairies. Whatever it is feels older than that." The phone felt slippery in my hand, as though it were a bloodied bone I held in place of metal and plastic. "Like I said," Melanie stated, "I'm really not supposed to talk about this. There's really no proof at all, so I could get in a lot of trouble for bringing it up with you. Anyway, you probably think I'm nuts." "No," I whispered, so quietly I doubt she heard my voice. "I don't. Go on." Clearly relieved, the young ranger continued with renewed confidence. "I had such a bad feeling when that teacher called the ranger station yesterday. I always do when we have one of our weird cases come up. I was told your little girl had gone wandering by the lakeside, so I checked there first, then headed out across a nearby grassland area, which is also pretty well known for reports. When I saw that burrow, to be honest, I wanted to turn back. We all avoid them usually, leave them well alone. But on the off chance a kid really had fallen down there, I shone my flashlight down the hole, feeling sure as hell something bad was going to happen to me for poking around. Right away I saw a little girl looking right up at me, not saying a word, just staring. Her eyes didn't look right to me, and she didn't talk or yell or anything. Just stood there like a rat when you turn the light on in the kitchen. Not used to people at all. I would have backed off and gotten out of there. But that teacher came running up behind me. Clearly figured from the way I was bent over, I'd found something. I couldn't walk away then, obviously. Nothing I could do but pull the kid out of the burrow and take her over to the ranger's station. She was acting wild. Didn't know anybody she saw. I pulled Diane to one side with my concerns, but she didn't want to know. "We've got to hand her over," she said to me. "What do you want me to do? Throw her back? Come on." Then my shift was over, and there was nothing I could do. I was up all night thinking about it. I don't know if I'm even doing the right thing calling you to tell you all this. "You are," I said. "You did." I hung up and sat with my face in my hands, like a scene from a melodrama, yet feeling nothing of that passion, nothing but the sureness of what I must do. At the end of the school day, I went to pick up the child. As I had anticipated, Miss Paxton was standing with it at the gates, her mouth pressed into a line as thin and white as a chalk drawing. "Hi," she said faintly. "Can we talk? Lainey's been having some difficulties at school today." "Of course she has," I cut in sharply. "And we both know why that is, don't we?" The teacher looked taken aback, a guilty avoidance in her eyes. I looked at the child, which seemed even less a fit in its own skin than ever, flinching and glaring at every passer-by. I gazed hard at the odd little face, the clawing hands with dirt under the nails. "Let's go," I said, and the child followed, if only in that it knew, in some base manner, that I was its caretaker here, above earth. I drove out to the national park without even stopping at home first, having already been by to pick up a change of clothes and a spade, which I had packed in a canvas bag in order to be less conspicuous. The sun was a low, yellow-red stain against the sky, looking like blood in egg yolk as I tumbled the child out of the car and ushered it out onto the trail. The light imprinted itself on the edges of my vision as we walked, turning all I saw that same shade. I had a map of the park with me, which was easy enough to follow. Lainey's class hadn't ventured particularly far out, only a couple of hours along one well-used path. Whether or not the child knew then where I was taking it, I don't know. It stumbled at the end of my arm with the same fussing displeasure with which it seemed to regard all things. The lake came into view, and the mountain range beyond it. To the right lay a stretch of grass so flat it was like absinthe spilled across a desktop, intimidating in the vastness of its plains. This was where the ranger, Melanie, had found the child dressed in my daughter's clothes. This was where the burrow dwellers lived, the old mischiefs of Walpurgis legend. I should have laughed to find myself believing in such myths without question. But I had seen this creature devour dirt and stones, could feel, now, with a firm conviction, the watchful, humming presence of something underfoot, far, far down. Heading out there, I hadn't expected to come across a burrow. The chance of doing so in such grand terrain was inconceivable, yet the park seemed full of such unlikely details. For after a further 20-minute excursion, I nearly found myself tumbling down into a pit much like that which Melanie had described. I stood at the mouth of it, feeling as I peered down the same crushing numbness that had gripped me since the telephone call in the office. Grief without hope of an end was that draining absence, and yet it was through that very hope that I was there. "Look," I said, to the child. "That's where you came from. I want you to go back down there and give me my daughter." I don't know why I thought it would understand me. Its white-blue eyes were lifeless but for the captured flare of the sun, its mouth slack, speechless. The young ranger had said the burrower dwellers left their sick in place of the people they took. This creature was surely one of them, insensible to anything that was said to it. That, or like any animal, it only heard my voice as a series of meaningless sounds. Either way, it could not respond to me, could not give me what I asked for. I looked at the stranger for a long moment, glancing over my shoulder and all about us, seeing no one else in view at this odd hour. Then, with a quick motion I couldn't take back, I stepped up behind the child and shoved it down into the burrow with both hands, glad that its scrabbling attempts to clamber back up the crumbling sides only pulled grass and dirt down on top of it. I heard it moving at the bottom of the pit, scratching with its fingernails, and took the spade out of my bag. If the child made any headway up the sloping side of the burrow, I would push it back down, I decided, repeating the act as often as I had to, until the ones that had sent it above ground returned my Lainey to me. Surely they had her. Still, I told myself, had kept her like a pet in their warrens, a thievery that might be reversed. Yet as I sat on the grass by the burrow, waiting, I began to consider, with all the imaginative plenty of dread, the possibility that something more terrible than merely being taken might have befallen my daughter. As night fell, and the cold, and the dark, and the silence provoked me, I at last began to wonder if the young ranger and I had been mistaken. Perhaps the little girl I had thrown down into the hole in the earth had been my daughter, after all. So what's the plan for Valentine's Day? Nothing, just playing PlayStation. I continue to type at my computer, absent-mindedly chewing a pen lid in my mouth, when I realize that no, that is not true. That is not true at all. Oh, Valentine's Day. I'm planning on taking my girlfriend to a fancy restaurant, I say, a little too quickly. Jennifer raises an eyebrow. I nonchalantly spin the pen between my fingers. Yeah, probably somewhere quite fancy. Actually, I add. Oh, really? Jennifer is nodding at me now, and I swear I can see something behind her eyes. Is it hurt? Betrayal? Jealousy? Whatever it is, I love it. Yeah, it's also our 3-month anniversary and... Wait, 3-month anniversary? I thought you said you met her in June. My pen clutters to the floor. Damn. Yeah, no, you're right. I did meet her in June. That's 4 months, actually. Wow, time flies when you're in love. I'm scrambling over my words a little now, and I can see she's looking at me a little suspiciously. I only remember because obviously we broke up in May, Jennifer continues, fiddling with the bottom of her blue latex glove. Did we? I pretend to look puzzled. Oh yeah, I remember now. Yeah, you called it off in May. May 5th. I freeze. I think it was around May 5th. Well, I'm happy for you. Steve, she says. Her voice has gone a little quiet. I'm also glad that it's not weird and we can work together and be adults about this whole... She waves her arm in the air. Situation. I am forcing a smile on my face as I nod in agreement. Underneath the smile, I'm raging inside. Our relationship boiled down to one simple word. Situation. Don't ever get involved with someone at work. Trust me, it is the worst decision you'll ever make. Not only do I have to see my ex every goddamn day, but I've made the situation way more complicated because I have to keep up a lie I stupidly told a few months ago, that I have a girlfriend. And if I remember correctly, it's now serious and we're thinking of moving in together. I can't even keep track of the lie anymore. So stupid. Was I talking about how I was thinking of buying a ring last time? Was my imaginary girlfriend a brunette or a blonde? Why didn't I write this down? I sigh as I start to fill in toe tags, darting a quick side-eye towards Jennifer. She is cleaning formaldehyde from the slabs. Her movements slow and gentle. I sigh again, louder this time. Her gentle and slow movements around the deceased were what initially attracted me to her. She tiptoes around them as though they are asleep, and she doesn't want to wake them. I like that. My pen starts to run out, and I tap it impatiently against the wall. I can hear the big boss, Dean, humming in our back office, sorting files which have piled up over the last couple of weeks. We've been really busy in the funeral parlor lately, and it hasn't helped that Jennifer has been on vacation the past 2 weeks, laying on the beach in Mexico, basking in the sun. I know this because we're still Instagram friends, something I have assured her doesn't bother my imaginary girlfriend. The fluorescent light above me flickers, and I look up at it in annoyance. Jennifer calls out to me from the other side of the room. "What's your girlfriend's name?" she asks. I hesitate for only a moment. "Sandra," I lie. "Sandra Adams. She's a university student studying arts." I stop for a second and then add, "Really smart, really pretty. Take that, Jennifer." I don't know how I've managed to come up with a name and backstory so fast, but I'm a little impressed with myself. Jennifer nods and walks out of the room. Ducked. Is it just me, or does she look a little upset? I don't care. She's the one that broke it off between us. I'm now alone in the funeral parlor, alone with my thoughts, alone with my lies. I whisper the name of my imaginary girlfriend over and over under my breath. Sandra Adams. Sandra Adams. I have to commit the lie to memory. Although the name feels a little familiar, where have I heard that name before? I'm deep in thought as a slow creak cuts into the silence. I turn round to see that one of the body drawers is opening. My eyebrow raises suspiciously, and I look around the room to see if someone is pulling my leg, but there's no one there but me. A tray starts to slide out, painfully slowly. And then there are 2 feet, one with a toe tag emerging. My mouth falls open in shock, and suddenly I can't speak. Hands are appearing, and they're bracing themselves against the wall for leverage. My heart feels like it has stopped in my chest when it dawns on me where I got the name Sandra Adams from. I had written that name on a toe tag just last week. Sandra, 20 years old, university student, blunt force trauma to the head, is pulling herself out of our fridge drawer. In the effort to climb out, she has smudged her blood-red lipstick so it almost reaches her left eye. I make a small sound, a guttural groan, and she twists unnaturally towards it. I hear all the bones click in her spine. She's wearing a pink dress, something I remember her mum gave to me when we were discussing the open casket funeral arrangements. The air in the room feels thick and suffocating, and the flickering fluorescent lights are causing weird shadows to dance on the wall behind her. Sandra's feet touch the ground, bare and splotchy. "Babe," Sandra rasps, taking her first wobbly step. Her lips are cracked under the sheen of red lipstick. "Did you forget Valentine's Day?" "He totally did," chimes in a voice. It's Jennifer, and she's walking over to Sandra, hand outstretched. My mouth is agape. "You must be Sandra," she says. Their hands shake and Jennifer recoils for a moment. And I know instantly it's because Sandra's skin is ice cold. Jennifer is examining Sandra's lipstick-smeared face. It's the face of a young arts college student, all right. But her eyes are open far too wide and really bloodshot, almost protruding from their sockets. The pupils are cloudy, like cataracts, and every muscle in her neck is twitching. It looks like there are bugs under her skin. "Ready for dinner, darling?" Sandra's voice echoes. It booms off the white tiles that cover the funeral parlor's walls and floors, sending shivers down my spine. She steps towards me, hand outstretched. and I stumble backward, the stench of formaldehyde clawing at my throat. As panic seizes hold of my shaking limbs, Jennifer's eyes bore into me, a mix of confusion and suspicion clouding her features. "Are you okay, Steve?" she asks. "You look a little pale." I felt lost for words, struggling to comprehend the impossible reality that is unraveling in front of me. Is this some sick joke? A cruel trick of the mind orchestrated by my guilt-stricken conscience? Or is this really happening? "She's not my girlfriend," I managed to squeak. "She's not, I swear. She's dead." Jennifer recoils, her expression hardening with a steely resolve. She looks back at Sandra, who is looking at me with a lopsided grin. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I want no part in it," Jennifer spits, her voice laced with venomous contempt. "Get her out of here before Dean sees you're bringing your dates to work." With trembling hands, I reach out to grasp Jennifer's arm, pleading for her to believe me, to save me from my dead imaginary girlfriend. But she's gone. Jennifer has left me with Sandra. A sinking feeling envelops my chest as I realize I've done it again. I've gotten involved with someone at work. "Let's go, darling," Sandra coos at me. She links onto my arm, her cold fingernails digging into my skin. The lights above our heads flicker for one last time. Before they go completely out, I scream. I used to work as a missing persons detective. This is the case that made me quit. I joined the force young, 21 years old. From the start, I was always taken by the idea of missing persons cases. It was more morally straightforward than homicide, more interesting than drugs. There was a pureness and righteousness in finding missing people which was hard to find in other areas of policing. It was unfaultable work. I would only ever be doing good. Of course, I spent my time walking the beat first. 6 years before I could finally take the promotional exam to make detective. And after that, it was another 4 years before the opportunity came to transfer into the missing persons department. I was truly passionate about the job, something which not many people can say. Every day I could feel as though I was truly making a difference. Delivering a presumed dead child back to their parents is an indescribably fulfilling experience. Of course, on the flip side came the crushing despair every time a case went cold, no matter how impossible the case seemed, no matter how much I reassured myself that there was nothing more I could do. There was always a voice in the back of my mind reminding me that the victim was still out there somewhere. The worst thing was when we found a corpse, knowing that I had failed to save a life. There are so many out there that I never found, or found too late. I see their faces over and over again in my dreams. The perpetrators have also stuck with me. I dealt with a lot of sick people in my time. I had a lot of horrible cases. A lot of times I doubted myself. But like I said, this is the one which made me leave the profession for good and never look back. By now in my career, I was one of the most senior detectives in the department. I got the lead on most cases, and was generally looked to as someone to take charge when things took a turn for the worse. I walked into the station and was notified first thing about the call that had come through during the night. 5 children, 2 girls and 3 boys between the ages of 4 and 6 had disappeared from the same neighborhood, literally within a few blocks of one another, in the same day. I'm not going to tell you their names or who they were, out of respect to them and their families. I'm also not going to give any place names or details which might give too much information about the case away. Trust me, you are better off knowing less. With the extremely similar circumstances between each disappearance, I made the executive decision to treat this as a serial kidnapping case. Normally, in these situations, some creep has driven around the neighborhood in a van, taking as many kids as he can. So right away, we got to work. I know it is a cliché, but the first 48 hours really are the most important on these kinds of things. Wanting to move quickly, my partner and I went to interview one set of parents and sent junior detectives to interview the others. The parents I interviewed told me that they had last seen their son the previous morning when he had gone out to play on the front lawn. The mother had been out there supervising him, but she had had to step back inside for 30 seconds to turn off the oven. When she hurried back outside, her son was gone. Brief questions posed to neighbors gave no further clues. None of them had seen anything. The other detectives had come back with similar stories, parents turning their back for a moment and their child disappearing in the meantime. With no leads, we began our second step, checking closed-circuit television in the surrounding area. Luckily, the suburbs where the kids were taken from were surrounded by dense commercial areas, high streets and shopping centers. These kinds of places always have loads of security cameras. But it takes time accessing and checking that much footage, and we were losing valuable hours. I was able to get permission from my superiors to rope in more officers, to check all of the cameras as quickly as possible. Credit to my team, it only took us 24 hours to find the right piece of footage. A few of my higher-ranking colleagues, as well as the 2 detectives who had found the evidence, gathered in my office to analyze it. I remember that those 2, only junior detectives at the time, looked a bit shaken when they brought the footage to us. When we all sat down to watch, they warned us that the contents of the clip was strange. Looking back, that was the wrong word for it. We asked them to sum up what was in the video first. They told us we needed to see for ourselves. The camera which had caught the video was at the back of a supermarket, facing into one of those street depots where food trucks pull in to unload and restock. You know, those creepy-looking alleys behind stores, full of old cardboard boxes. They always give off an eerie vibe when you pass them in the street. This particular site had openings on 2 public roads, which is how the perpetrator must have got access. The roads were unusually quiet ones for the area, which explains how nobody noticed. The closed-circuit television footage began with the long alley empty. Then far, far back, right at the end, we began to see a blurry, pixelated shape appear out of the dark. We could not make out what it was yet. It was still in the low-quality image stage. The shifting mass of fuzzy pixels grew closer, and closer, and closer, until we could make out an adult, on foot, with several children behind him. We were taken aback. Unusual for kidnappers to stay on foot. This made it much harder to see how he could have taken the kids without garnering attention. Eventually, the group came within clear view, and we all let out audible gasps, a mixture of shock, confusion, and, at least in my case, fright. You see a lot of things in that job that give you the shivers, but not much like what was on that video screen. I shall do my best to describe the surreal sight that met our eyes. The man, and we could tell by his imposing height that it was a man, was wearing a disturbing get-up. He had on one of those Mr. Punch masks, you know, like the classic puppet character, an unsettling thing with a too long nose, hooked chin, and bulging eyes. The skin on the face of the mask had been painted far too pale, almost snow-white, brazenly contrasting with the crimson-tinted cheeks, giving the unintentional complexion of someone at death's door. The mask was cartoonish, with heavily exaggerated angles and features, and I'm not afraid to say that it made me extremely uncomfortable. There was something about the popping eyes, with their swollen veins and poorly sketched pupils, that seemed to stare at me through the screen, and past that, into my mind. And the smile. It was only a mask, but the smile gave off an unmistakable air of malice and insidious intent. When I looked at the mask too long, I felt deeply afraid. I felt as if something dark and terrible was searching hungrily for me. Whoever the creator of this visage was, they were an unhinged individual. The man wore a bizarre hat, black, shaped almost like a medieval jester's, complete with silver baubles at the end of each sleeve. The cap and bells went down the back of his head far enough that his hair was obscured. He had a strange kind of coat on, more like a robe. It had no buttons or zip, and it was long, too long, flowing past his ankles and pooling on the ground around him in folds, almost like a miniature bridal train. The coat was formed of hundreds of colored patches, stitched together, but you could not describe it as colorful. None of the patches were bright or vibrant. Each was a different dark hue, some muddy brown, some gray, some a deep maroon, some dirty yellow, some chemical orange, some inky green. Not one color was actually aesthetically pleasing, almost as if the coat had been sewn with the intention of causing visual discomfort. The coat had many, many pockets, far more than could ever be filled. It seemed that almost every patch had a pocket stitched into it. From two of these pockets, the two on his left and right hip, stretched a handkerchief of ribbon. The handkerchiefs were composed of a pattern of black and white, alternating diamonds. The handkerchiefs stretched a few meters behind the man, and gripping tightly onto the fabric were the children. A scan of their faces confirmed that these were the missing kids we were looking for. And yet, none of them looked traumatized. None were upset or crying. They all smiled and laughed, gripping the handkerchiefs. The strips of fabric were like those magician's tricks, the never-ending ones. The children held on with both hands, 3 on one side, 2 on the other. They skipped along happily and energetically. Clearly, they had been groomed by the perpetrator in the mask. Disturbingly, he himself also skipped. He raised his knees in jovial leaps, almost like a dance or jive. Each time he frolicked up and down, he lifted his feet, which were encased in strange, pointed shoes that curled upwards. Keeping time to this eerie jig down the dark alley, the man held a wooden pipe to the mouth hole in the grinning mouth of the mask. He was playing the same tune, over and over again. It was Greensleeves. That tune has always been a personal favorite of mine. Something about the simple melody, repeated over and over again, is utterly entrancing. But hearing it in this setting, it was nothing but terrifying. Nah, the tune was too absorbing. It was almost hypnotic. When I listened for too long, I could not tear my eyes away from the screen. There was also something slightly off about the man's playing, hard to pin down, a small, discordant note every now and again. The procession continued through the alley, the haunting figure at the front leading the troop, until they passed out of the security camera's viewing range. My fellow investigators and I were gobsmacked. We had absolutely no idea what to think. Never, in any of our respective careers, had we seen anything like this. Could this really be happening? Was that eerie figure really out there somewhere? At least it did a little to strengthen our resolve. There was no way that we were going to leave those kids with somebody that insane. We quickly sent out reports calling for anyone seeing someone matching the odd description of the man we had seen to come forward as soon as they could. At a point like that, witness sightings were our best bet. I made the mistake of reassuring the anguished parents that we were going to bring their children home. But as the days went by, we had to widen our search from city to district. And then, after a week, the state. We wanted to be absolutely sure we caught him. We had our first press conference. We released a still photo of the security footage along with it, leading to a lot of ridiculous questions. I think it was right at the end of the first week, when the first newspaper gave the kidnapper his name, the Piper. I will admit, it was fitting. His strange outfit, musical accessory, and most of all, the way those kids were just happily skipping along next to him, as if in a trance, all harked back to the age-old Pied Piper story. The name stuck. Soon, all of the press was calling him that. Then the public love criminals with a nickname. I will admit, even us in the station began calling him the Piper. Unfortunately, no sightings came through. Nobody had seen the distinctive figure. We were just beginning to lose hope when we got the call. A man a few towns over had spotted a man, dressed in attire matching the Piper's, with the children behind him, in the alley behind his apartment building, late at night. We went over there and interviewed the man, but he could not tell us much more than what he had seen. It was very late, he was very tired, and he was sure his eyes had been playing tricks on him. Luckily, the building had a security camera facing the alley. We were given access to the reels of footage over the last few days and trawled back until we found the period of time during which the man had reported spotting the Piper. This footage was watched only by me and my partner, Jeffords, in the security room of the apartment building. With a similar angle to the first video, the camera faced down the long, dark alley. The cobbles were littered with broken glass and junk. This was a much shadier district. Then we began to hear that same haunting melody, Green Sleeves. It sounded as if it was coming from somewhere far off in the darkness at first, but it gradually got closer, and the closer it got, the more I began to shiver. Once again, we saw the same sight emerge as we had in the first piece of footage. The scene was practically unchanged. The Piper still wore the same disturbing mask, the same peculiar hat and coat. He again proceeded slowly, rhythmically forward, dancing through the night. Still he held that wooden pipe to his lips and played. And still, the 5 poor children were behind him, either side. Still they clutched tightly with both hands to the long black and white handkerchiefs. But whereas before they had laughed and skipped along with their tormentor, now their faces were gaunt and tear-stained. They looked thin, horribly thin, far thinner than they had before. I had the awful thought that these children looked as if they had not eaten in a week, and they had been moving across the country, on foot, for most of that time. They did not frolic now. They stumbled and tripped, as if they were being pulled along by the Piper and his handkerchiefs. Yet still they gripped the fabric. Still they refused to let go. They were clearly in tremendous pain and tremendously fatigued. God, why did they not let go? As Jeffords and I watched in horrified silence, the Piper removed one hand from his pipe, though he continued to play, deftly manipulating his instrument with only 5 fingers. His other hand reached into one of the many pockets of his coat. As he drew the hand out, we could make out something pink and grey, squirming in his hand. I squinted at the computer screen we were watching the footage on, and made the dreadful realization that he was holding a rat. The rat looked well fed. It was large and muscular. However, the mangy fur hinted at some kind of disease. The Piper lifted the rodent by the tail as it clawed and twisted in the air, gnashing its jagged teeth. It looked mad with aggression, almost rabid. He suddenly tossed it backwards, behind himself and the kids. It hit the ground on all 4s and scampered into the shadows. He then reached into a different pocket, retrieving a second rat and performing the same chilling ritual as he had with the first. As I looked closer, I could just about make out the way the cloth of his coat was wriggling. How many did he have in there? My brain suddenly noticed something. There were more rats, a little way behind the procession, staying just within the shadows, but always following. They leapt and crawled over the trash and obstacles in their way, moving in small groups of 3s or 4s, tenaciously following behind. Eventually, the eerie figure of the piper and the poor children moved out of shot, but for at least 10 minutes, the exodus of rats continued. Every so often, the small forms would dart along the alley, always following. The entire investigation team was utterly aghast. Whatever we were dealing with here, it was something far, far worse than we had first anticipated. We did not tell the press or the public about the development in the case. This was kept strictly confidential. I felt confusion, and I felt helplessness, and I felt fear. Fear for the kids, trapped with that thing, and a deeper fear. Fear because I was beginning to realize that there are beings out there, beyond what human minds are able or willing to understand. Now the trail began to go cold. We had no more witness sightings, and with the search area now so large, there was little we could do. I could not order car checks. The piper moved on foot. I tried offering a monetary reward. I tried helicopter searches. Nothing. I tried sniffer dogs. Still nothing. I felt utterly unable to do anything to help the missing children, and I felt solely responsible for whatever horror was being inflicted on them. The worst moment was facing the parents, telling them that I had been wrong, that their little ones were not going to come home. Soon, it had been a month, then 2. The case was essentially dead. My colleagues stopped working on it. My superiors gave us new assignments. But I could not concentrate on any new cases. My mind was replaying the footage, over and over again. My dreams were taken up with nightmarish visions of that horrible, spine-chilling mask. Then, 3 months later, I was on a visit to a different precinct, picking up some samples from their forensics lab. I overheard one of their officers talking about how, way upstate, the cops were getting flooded by reports of a massive freak rat migration. How, in one town, people were stuck in their homes as the streets were flooded with the rodents. My mind instantly began to whir. Of course, it was an absolute shot in the dark, but the piper had been seen heading upstate, and it was completely the wrong time of year for that kind of behavior from the animals. Those kinds of migrations actually happen more than you would think in some farm communities, but only in the late summer. One explanation I could think of was that they were being attracted to something, just like the rats in that alley. At that point in time, I was willing to do just about anything to find those kids, to bring some kind of closure. I asked the officers what town they meant. I'm not going to tell you its name, but it was a small rural community, out in the backwoods, surrounded by farmland. I did my own research and found that the town was a day's drive away. I did not tell my superiors about this development. There was no way they were going to authorize me to investigate such a tenuous lead. The only person I confided in was Jeffords. He was just as invested as me. He agreed to come up with me. By the time we got round to going, the migrations had been over for a month. But that did not matter. I was sure that we would find something. From research and speaking to the locals, we discovered that the majority of the rats had been seen moving in the direction of an abandoned farm a half-mile away. We arrived at the farm and were instantly hit by the eerie atmosphere. The sight of the big, decrepit windmill looming ahead made me shiver. And we noticed the rats immediately too. By the time we arrived, the sun was beginning to set, and as soon as we got out of the car, The rodents swarmed around our feet. They appeared from hay bales and shrubbery, and skittered away again, just as fast under our boot heels. We made our way to the old farmhouse first, and went from room to room, checking for anything. Here the rats were even more populous, filling up corridors and diving out of rotting pantry shelves. We found nothing in the house, though we tore it apart, searching under beds and in cupboards. Next, we trudged up to the big barn at the top of the hill. Looking up as we approached, I felt an unshakable sense of dread. The barn had been a true agricultural leviathan when it had been functioning. It must have been able to store more grain than could ever be needed. The red and white paint was peeling off now, and there was a large hole in the roof where the timbers had collapsed. Jeffords and I heaved open the large doors and entered. The smell hit us first. It was absolutely rancid, a mixture of feces and death. The interior was pitch black. We could literally see nothing inside. Turning on our torches, we cautiously made our way past the stacks of moulding hay, which were piled on top of each other all the way up to the roof. The ground was obscured by layers of thick, muddy straw, which in turn was caked with rodent feces. The only light was that provided by our torches, and the weak moonlight shining through the hole in the roof. The rats were all around us, constantly brushing up against our legs, scuttling past. When I pointed my flashlight at the stacks of hay, I could see it writhing and shifting, as if it was alive. Each bale must have been absolutely packed with the things. Every so often, one would leap out from the hay. The rats made me uneasy. They never quite plucked up the courage to attack us, but they screeched and bared their teeth whenever we passed them. When I pointed my torch far into the distance of the path ahead of us, I could see thousands of yellow eyes staring from the shadows, watching us, chittering. It was one of the most eerie sights I have ever had the displeasure of seeing. I noticed it first, a faint sound coming from the end of the barn. As we got closer, hearts pounding, my ears could make it out to be that same damn tune. Greensleeves. Except this time it was slightly different. It was not being played on a wooden pipe. It had a different kind of tinkle, almost like a piano, but not quite. Now Jeffords and I were both extremely on edge, expecting any moment to see that horrific smiling face peeking out from the shadows. Eventually, we drew towards the end of the barn, but the back wall came up too quickly. From the outside, the barn should have gone on for a few more minutes. Then, we saw the door. In the center of the back wall was a rusty metal door. It was thick steel. It looked like it had been taken from an industrial site. There were deep scratches and dents in the surface, and rust stained it all over. As I drew closer to that door, I began to feel an unexplainable fear. I wanted to turn and run away from that wretched place and never come back. I did not want to see what lay beyond the door. I knew somehow that whatever its contents were, it would be awful. We found the source of the noise, sitting just in front of the door, an old battered music box. I could not find any kind of switch or lever to turn it off, so we let it continue to play its hypnotic tune. It acted almost as a background theme as we continued. The door, strangely, was not locked. We pulled the handle down, and with some effort, it creaked open. Instantly, the smell hit us. It was 100 times worse than when we had first entered the barn. Jeffords turned and vomited on the floor. I knew in the pit of my stomach what we were going to find in there. I'm going to describe what was behind the door as best I can, in such a way that is still respectful to the deceased. I do not want to go into graphic detail, especially not in this kind of case. But I have to. I must. I need to get across the horror. If I come across as apathetic in my retelling of it, that is because I have wept for so long that I am numb now. There was a room behind the door. Somebody had put up a fake back wall in order to conceal its presence. The room was small, but not cramped. There was a table set up in the center, with 5 chairs around it. The walls, floor, and furniture of the room were smeared with rodent feces, like the rest of the barn, but in an even higher concentration. There were thick chains connected to the walls, which ran all the way to each chair. Every chair had 2 chains, each with a manacle on the end, presumably to shackle the feet. In the center of the table, there was a pot of crayons and colored pencils, and there were stacks upon stacks of paper drawings, children's drawings, of houses and stick figures and pirate ships and random scribbles. God knows how long that monster kept those poor kids in there. Every drawing was soaked with blood. There was also blood spattered on the table, chairs, walls, and floor. It was long dried and crusted. This is more difficult than you can imagine for me to write. We did not find a single whole body in there, only bits and pieces, a few gnawed limbs, appendages, and torsos, scattered all over the room. Every body part we found was covered in bite marks, almost stripped to the bone in some places, tiny little gouges made by tiny little teeth. The piper had kept those children in there. He had attracted the waves of rats. He had chained them up, so they did not have a chance. And he had left the rats to devour them. It has taken me a few tries to type this. I cannot stop myself from gagging. We found that goddamn fucking mask lying in the middle of the floor amidst the blood and the feces. It stared up at us, grinning, mocking, laughing. You couldn't save them. It giggled. We left the barn, in a daze. I stomped on the music box, crushing it beneath my boot. We called for backup, and it soon arrived. Already, Jeffords and I had decided to just tell the parents we had found the bodies. Nothing more. No details. Over the next few weeks, our team found more in the room. A few teeth, bones, strands of hair, fingers. DNA tests confirmed them to belong to the 5 missing children. All 5 accounted for. On the chairs, they found traces of human urine and feces, confirming our fears. The children had suffered for a long time. In one corner, they found the handkerchiefs. We tested them. They were covered in superglue, scraps of skin and torn flesh where small hands had been ripped away. The piper was not an eldritch being. He did not lure the kids to follow him through mystical means. He was just a sick, twisted, depraved monster of a man, wasn't he? You see, ever since that day in the barn, I have not been able to get the Greensleeves tune out of my head. Even after a year, I find myself humming it, no matter how much it revolts me. Even when I'm able to force myself to stop, it continues to play at the back of my mind. But nowadays, when it is late at night and I am alone, either in my room or working a night shift in my new accounting job, I hear it, clearly now, as if something is playing it on a wooden pipe just outside. And I want to listen. I want to go outside. I want to... Sorry, I have just had to stop my foot from tapping to the rhythm. I want to follow the music off into the dark.